Welcome back, everyone, to the Beginner to Master Speedrun episode number 20. Coming into today, rated 1139 on a 67 game win streak. And let's hop into it. Playing ZZ Speedy. We'll see how speedy my opponent is. Okay, we have a Caro Kann. Against a Caro Kann, there's a lot of different things to play. D4 is the most classical move. I'm going to play a variation called the two knights attack, which goes after d5 to play knight c3. And I made a video about this a few years ago, just showing kind of the basic strategy, the kind of common lines from this opening. Bishop g4 is one of the most common moves, simply pinning the knight. And against this move, I'll just play h3. Very often black will take and kind of give away the bishop pair and then try and get the pawns on the light squares. So we do see bishop f3. In other openings, it's usually not a great idea to take on f3 so early, but it is a common approach for black in this line. And now I have a choice here between taking with the queen or the knight. I'm going to take with the knight. If I were to take with queen, then knight f6 would win time. So pretty solid position so far. Have the knight and queen developed. Black has nothing developed. Traded off the only developed piece with the bishop. But yeah, after knight f6, it's still kind of a question how to proceed. If I take, then I think black would be likely to take back with the pawn. I'm not really achieving much, because then after like bishop d6 and castling, black will have a very safe kingside. So I'll try and be active here. Play the move bishop to c4, which essentially pins the knight to f7. So if takes, I could first take on f7 and then recapture. But so far, I think, black is playing solidly. A move like knight d7, yeah, is very fine. Reinforcing the knight. Black maybe is threatening this move, knight e5. Now, there is a move that comes to mind here, queen to b3, which it's aggressive because it attacks the f7 and b7 pawns, but it would leave this knight undefended. Of course, black wouldn't be able to take because of bishop f7 mate. But if I play queen b3, there's something like knight e5, defending and pressuring the bishop. It seems a little bit too risky for white. So I'm going to just play the move d4, just seizing space in the center, preventing knight e5, which I think was one of the big threats. E6, okay, solid move. And we'll keep completing development. I could play bishop g5 to pin, but then bishop e7. Not sure if I want to commit my bishop so early. So I'll just castle here, staying solid. Also staying flexible, because maybe the bishop will come here, maybe even to e3. And sometimes when you're not sure where exactly to develop the piece, you just want to play other useful moves first. So castling is a move that I'm pretty sure that I wanted to play. Of course, I maybe could have considered casting queenside. Maybe black is considering that here. Queen b6. Also attacking the pawn. So what to do? A move like rook d1 or c3 would simply defend. Even bishop e3. Bishop e3 is interesting because it loses b2, but then maybe allows for some counterplay. Not sure if I want to even allow that, though. I'm going to play c3. It's staying very, very solid, creating the pawn chain. Still staying flexible with the bishop, too. And I didn't play rook d1 because maybe the rook wants to go to e1. This is the only half-open file for me. It's the only file where I don't have a pawn. And usually rooks like to be on such files. So black may be trying to figure out how to complete development from their end. The bishop really doesn't have any of these squares, so bishop e7 I think is most likely. And then black can maybe choose whether to castle kingside or queenside. I would be surprised if black castles queenside immediately. And actually, if black castles queenside, maybe I would have knight g5 to win the f7 pawn. So we do see bishop e7. And now what to do? I mean, bishop e3 is beginning to look more attractive, simply aligning with the queen. And if queen takes b2, I can win the pawn back. I have a move like rook b1 and rook takes b7. And I think that would be a good trade for white. Now, if I play bishop e3, black has this move knight d5. So I'm not sure if I'm getting much there. Realizing the bishop is probably just happier on f4. Because bishop e3, knight d5, the bishop's just kind of a dead piece on this diagonal. Pawn would be blockaded. Yeah, let's go for bishop f4. On this diagonal, it has the idea of either bishop d6 or knight d6, which is it's a square deep in black's territory that's more controlled with my pieces. And, I mean, probably the threat is knight d6 to check the king, and if takes, the bishop would be preventing black from castling. And then I would have two bishops against two knights, which is generally a good imbalance. Of course, in this line, I'm still allowing black to take the pawn, but yeah, I think I'd be happy to get the rook into play. So my opponent, not playing super speedy, definitely taking their time, has a small time advantage. I mean, one thing black can consider here is taking on e4, getting rid of my knight, and then bringing the other knight to f6. And this would gain time on my queen. And I'd probably play something like queen e2 or c2 and stay solid. But I still like the fact that, I mean, I have the bishop pair. Because of the early trade of pawns in the center, the position is decently open. So it's like a nice position to have the two bishops. And if black castles kingside, then maybe there's some attacking potential. Maybe I can drop back this bishop and start targeting some squares on the king side. So officially up on time now. We see pawn c5, which is not a move I was expecting, but it is a common idea, especially from these Caro-Kann structures, to exert pressure in the center. And this move also allows black to control d6, so it is preventing knight d6 or bishop d6. And now I have to figure out like what to do with this pawn tension. If I take, it could lead to some trades. Pushing doesn't work, black can just take. Although pushing, yeah, even knight takes, so I don't want to do that. I'm taking a moment here to consider the options. I mean, something like rook d1, just to reinforce the pawn. Maybe taking first and then rook d1. Yeah, because I don't think I want to allow black to take. If I play rook d1, then maybe black starts with taking and then takes, and it just seems like an unnecessary risk. So let's take. This could lead to some trades. Black likely to take back with the knight. And with more trades of pawns, the position is opening up further, which, again, should favor the bishops in the long run. Black takes with the bishop here. So if I want to, I could snag it and have the two bishops against two knights. Yeah, let's go for this. If black takes with the queen, maybe I can take on b7, counterattacking the rook. And then black would have no time to take the bishop. So black should probably take with a knight here. But we do see takes with queen, so I have to be very careful that I'm not walking into any problems. But yeah, this looks good for me. Because rook b8 is met with bishop takes b8. Queen takes c4 is met with queen takes a8 with check. Black was playing the first part of the game solidly, but I think I'm getting away with the free pawn, and I don't think black is getting much compensation. Now this bishop is still attacked, so should either defend it or move it. Bishop d3. One thing about bishops is they don't like to stare at pawn chains. The bishop on c4 was kind of staring at this very solid chain. On d3, it's a bit more centralized, aims at h7, which could be a bigger target. Again, rook b8 is off limits. Black could play e5, but then I can play bishop e3 to attack the queen. And meanwhile, the queen is actually kind of nice here, because this knight is tied down to this knight, except, okay, black still moves this knight, because if I take, then it's a trade. So do I want to actually take on d7? I mean, bishop e3, there's knight takes. I have to move a bit quicker here too. What to do? I think I'd rather keep the bishop on the board. Like, it's a nice piece, helps defend the king side, pierces through the diagonal. Black now has a chance to play this move. Yeah, my queen is looking a little bit delicate on b7. Like, this almost traps the queen. But yeah, okay, I'm hitting the knight and I'm still covering b8. So everything is fine. And if we do see this move, maybe I'll just drop back to b3 and come back to c2. But we see knight b6, so black is trying to keep my queen in their territory. I don't see how black is actually trapping it though, so I'm gonna play rook d1. I mean, just centralizing one of the rooks. This is only open file on the board. Okay, it looks like black forgot about my bishop on g3. It's a sniper bishop. I think it's a common mistake at this rating level sometimes, not seeing the whole board, seeing the connections from king side to queen side in this case. And now, yeah, now I'm up a rook in addition to the extra pawn. And now this rook is being hugged tightly by my queen and bishop. It's defended by the knight though, so rook's not actually trapped. I mean, overall, my opponent played a pretty solid game, but I mean, I was probably just more solid. Like I put my pieces on good squares, and eventually, I mean, my opponent gave some free material. Black is offering a queen trade here. Yeah, let's trade queens. Happy to simplify with extra rook. Now we'll bring the bishop back. It'd be funny if we see rook b8 making the same mistake. Oh, okay. Yeah, sometimes you have to make the same mistake multiple times to actually learn from it. Okay, that was a funny finish. Maybe there was some tilt from blundering the first rook from my opponent. But hopefully it's still some instructive moments from this game, from the opening. We saw a very solid variation of the Caro Kann, the two knights attack. I will link the two knights video that I made about this opening below if you want to check it out. It was a video from a few years ago, but I think it's still evergreen content. And yeah, from my experience, like sometimes black should just play e6 here, try and keep the position closed with white having the two bishops. And then in this game, I mean, black probably should have traded on e4 a bit sooner, gained time on my queen, and then something like bishop d6 I think is fine. Of course, okay, I probably should protect the pawn, like queen d3, then bishop d6 and castle kingside, and this would be a relatively level position. So anyway, that was the first game of the episode, now rated 1146. let's move on to the second game, playing Zebra, 1965. And we'll have another King's Pawn opening. I say another King's Pawn opening, referring to the fact that I think most of the games in the Speedrun series have been in the King's Pawn opening. And it's the 4 knights with bishop c4, so this does allow the center fork trick, which I think is a very common variation at this rating level. My opponent's going for bishop takes f7, understanding that if knight takes, I win back the piece. So they're trying to kind of get the most for the minor piece. But in this case, even though it looks scary that my king is exposed, lost casting rights, this is just known to be much, much preferable for black. King hides on g8. I have the center. h6 is coming, e4 is coming. I've actually been asked about this variation a lot. Whenever I show the center fork trick, people ask, what about bishop takes f7? And it's nothing to be scared of if you're playing this position with the black pieces. This knight's going to be kicked back to h3. And yeah, then I'll have very fluid development with the bishops. Probably start with bishop to g4. I mean, one thing about like determining whether your king is weak in chess, the king is usually only weak if the opponent can effectively attack it. And even though, okay, I don't have an f-pawn, this diagonal might be more open, there's just no way for white to exploit the king. Now, white's trying to play super aggressively, sacrificing the knight. I'm happy to take it. And if knight comes in, I'm going to have way more defenders, even if the bishop comes in. I have more pieces to defend with than white has to attack with. And now I'm really just looking to trade. I could take on g5. Could also start with bishop to g4. I think I kind of prefer bishop g4. Completing development. Really just looking to trade on f3 and then trade on g5. And there is this tension on the h-file as well. So like if it's my move and I can take and then take and then take, I was going to say that maybe it could lead to winning the rook. But here now the rooks are connected. So I'm realizing if I take on f3, it would help open the g-file for white. I mean, of course, it is nice to trade, but I really don't want to give white any source of counterplay or fun in the position. So I'll take a moment here to try and figure out the most solid continuation. I could also play e4, which is maybe not the solid type of move that I'm probably looking for, but maybe it can win material against a knight. e4 take. That could walk into problems though, like queen f4 would attack the bishop and then my queen as well. So e4 might be playable, but it's probably not a move I want to actually spend too much time on. So, and there's a move here that it really doesn't force matters in the position, but I think I'm going to go for is queen d6. And it's really just a solidifying move, putting the ball back in white's court, keeping the knight pinned, keeping the tension between the bishops, and also aiming to get my rook to f8. I also overdefend the pawn, so yeah, no need to worry about knight takes e5. And yeah, let's just put the rook on f8. So this move and this move, it's really just optimizing the pieces. I mean, the queen and rook are a bit happier now. A knight is now, yeah, it was unpinned, so now it's attacking the bishop. But I'll just move back. And sometimes this is just the strategy to go for. When you're up material, you just want to be solid, try and just dominate the center in this case, and not really force matters. I mean, white's trying to create some type of attack. But here, let's go ahead and take. Even though it opens the e-file, queen defends the bishop, and the queen also helps defend the pawn along with the rook. So I think that was a free pawn. Knight moves back. Okay, white's keeping tension. Maybe now it's time to take. But then the knight comes in. Any other options? I mean, I guess white wants to take and then play knight g5, which might be a little bit hard to stop. So I think I will go for bishop g4. Just moving the bishop back so it's not a target. And bishop on e7 is defended enough times by the queen and knight. And white could take and then take. But again, I don't mind trading. I'm thinking long term, if I can keep the pawn on f4, I mean, this e3 square would be really nice for my knight. I can't teleport there immediately. Oh, this is funny. So white's going for maybe repetition. If I move back, but let's move back this way. So keeping the bishop on this diagonal, so if the knight moves back, then I can consider trading. And if not, I think now the time has come to take the bishop. Yeah, the bishops were staring at each other for long enough. And I'm happy with most of my pieces. Like, the bishop's fine here. This knight is really the one piece not doing much in the position. So I'm going to maneuver. Start with 97. And I'm mainly trying to figure out how I can get to e3. Like, knight f5 now looks pretty good. It does obstruct the rook from defending the pawn, but white also obstructed their rook from attacking the pawn. So it's fine that the pawn's only defended once and attacked once. And even if white goes in with the knight, I can go in with my knight. It does look a little bit messy, like our knights are in each other's territories. But with this move, I'm attacking the rook and obstructing this rook from defending the knight. So white saw this, but didn't quite see this, winning another piece. Now it's cleanup time. Yeah, I could en passant, but that leaves a knight undefended, so I'll take the free g5 pawn. I feel like this game had maybe a slightly similar theme to the first game. Really just a matter of being solid and patient and jumping on opportunities for free material. But also a very important opening lesson in this game. Like bishop c4, it's played at especially this rating level, but generally it's not recommended. Like if you play the four knights as white, I'd recommend either the four knight scotch, which is d4 here, or the main line, which is bishop to b5. But bishop c4 is exploited, and of course if takes, then d5 is very powerful. I maybe had one game previously in the speedrun, earlier episode, and just to show it, bishop b5, there's takes, and then queen d5. It's a nice move to attack and defend. Black just dominates the center here. But as we saw, bishop takes f7. It's also very nice for black. And yeah, white gave the knight, and it was a pretty smooth game from there. So let's do one more. I have 1152, a nice rating. New 10-minute game. Playing Moto Lat from the USA. G6 pre-moved. Okay, so I wonder if bishop g7 will be pre-moved. It's not, but d6 comes very quickly. So this is what we call the modern defense, which usually employs a setup with bishop g7, and then, I mean, it's similar to the Pierts, where knight f6 is included. Against this, I'm just going to develop, prioritize the kingside development. Knight f3 and bishop c4, getting ready to castle. And there are a few potential traps in this position. Knight f6 does not walk into a trap. If I remember after the game, I can show a few ways black can go wrong. Against this move, I've encountered this position a lot in higher level games, and the move I like to play is queen e2. Maybe the more natural move would be knight c3 to defend and develop. The point of queen e2 is to actually support this pawn e5 break, which I'll play right away. It's a nice way to just attack the knight. There's cases where this move can be considered overextending or weakening, but yeah, the knight and the queen, and potentially later the bishop or maybe a rook can support the pawn. So gaining space early. Usually black should take, and yeah, then I'll take back, and then there's knight d5. I did play this opening, I think this exact position once against Hikaru. It was our infamous game where Hikaru was winning. It was on Lee Chess. He was like begging for me to resign because I blundered, but then I ended up tricking him and beating him. Pretty sure Caro played knight g7 in that game. Knight h5, probably not as good. The knight's very close to being trapped here. I mean, if I could play g4, it would trap the knight, controlling f4 with the bishop. So there's a move here which is very multi-purpose, which I think I'll go for, which is h3. And not only preventing bishop g4, which is one of black's main developing squares for this bishop, but I'm also preparing g4 to trap the knight. And black might have to do some contortions to save the knight on h5. It's not easy to prevent this move. Like f5 is not legal. And yeah, bishop h8 is a funny sort of contortion that if I play g4, then black does have knight g7. It looks really ugly for black, but I'm not actually winning the knight. Now the question is, do I want to still go for g4? I also have bishop h6 with some nice initiative. I could also just castle and follow basic principles. So there's a choice here. I mean, if I play g4, knight g7, yeah, the knight's just so ugly there. It blocks the bishop, and then I can play bishop h6 and pin the knight to the rook. I'm gonna go for this. There are cases where, like, I mean, sometimes the general rule is you should not push pawns on the side that you plan to castle. But I haven't committed to castling. And my king's also just safe in the center. So I think it's fine just chilling on e1. And I mean, if knight g7 comes, then after I play bishop h6, I'll just have a very active position. And maybe some point I can castle queenside and then focus on a pawn storm on the king side. So it's a feel-good opening so far, but I do have to give my opponent credit for saving the knight, because that may have been the only way to do so. An e6. Yeah, it's I mean, it's kind of an ugly move which restricts the knight and the bishop, but it also blocks my bishop from causing any harm. d5 might be coming next. Now, one thing that comes to mind in this position is if I can get a knight to f6, that's almost smothered mate. It would force queen f6. So I'm thinking knight d2 or knight c3 to get into e4. But black's in time to play d5. So I'm wondering if it's worth trying to prevent d5, but it's not an easy move to prevent. Like taking, I don't think accomplishes much. Yeah, I think I'll just complete development. Knight d2. If black plays d5, I'll drop the bishop back. And then the center would be closed down. And then the focus of play can really just shift to the king side. I'm thinking maybe at some point bishop g5, bishop f6 could be an idea. And then combine that with pushing the pawn, maybe getting the queen to h6. It's Still a very rich position with a lot of attacking ideas for white. You see b6. So yeah, maybe the bishop wants to come to b7. Would be a nice square for it. But with b6 and not d5, I do have the option of playing this. And yeah, I'm not going to spend too much more time here. Let's go for this. I am allowing the fork, but yeah, if black goes for the fork, then I have a very strong counterpunch. So yeah, d5 would be a big blunder here. It might be necessary for black to play this move, which would then lose a rook. It'd be funny if we see this move, allowing the smothered mate fork. We see rook e8. And this gives a square for the king, but still allows knight f6, which, I mean, this is pretty devastating for black. It's still a fork. I'm actually not interested in taking the rook. I think I'm more interested in taking the pawn with check. If king goes back, I can go back. If the king moves to e7, then I can skewer. So very difficult position for black here. Of course, I don't want to repeat and take a threefold repetition. Like even if I was playing like Magnus Carlsen or even Stockfish, white should be winning here. Even if black plays perfectly from here. But how to maximize my advantage? I could start with bishop g5, which sets up this check. I guess bishop g5, there's rook e7. Yeah, I'm really just looking for the cleanest put away. There's also knight g5, idea of knight h7, but then the king can run. Of course, I could take the rook, but I think I'll start with bishop to g5. I just like the bishop aligned with the queen. And yeah, king e7, of course, no longer a good option for black. Knight h7 is very likely to come next move. Yeah, I just have to be careful not to spend too much time. We do see rook e7. So yeah, do I want to leave my knight on f6, or do I want to cash in the material? I don't think there's any need to cash in. I'm going to play h4. Very simple idea of just getting the rook involved, maybe getting the pawn to h6, or trading. As the king's going nowhere, anytime I'll have an h7, so I'll keep black very much in a bind here. Knight's controlling these squares, so it's so hard to untangle. Like the king, rook, and queen are pretty much all paralyzed, along with the bishop and the knight. I mean, there is knight e8. And then I can cash in probably. I mean, maybe we'll see black do something on the queen side. Like bishop e7. At least a somewhat active move. Or knight d7. Well, I'm not too afraid of knight takes knight, because then I take back with pawn with the fork. So let's go for h5. Okay, now I'll take back and likely be winning a lot of material here, because if I end up taking the knight, it will unleash the skewer. I'm also threatening to take the rook, which forks the king and queen. So it seems like I'm not just winning the rook or the knight, I'll be winning a bit more. Not to mention, when I take this, I unleash the rook, which actually traps a bishop in the corner. So I'm really spoiled for choice here. Like taking I mean, taking wins the queen, but taking here threatens mate. No, let's just take the knight, win the queen. And then later I'll open the h-file, probably get my queen involved. I mean, of course, black can breathe a little bit more easily now that, yeah, some pieces have come off the board. Okay, so my knight is a bit pinned, but let's try and work to expose the black king. If king takes, it's actually made in two with queen takes e6. And here, now I don't think I mind allowing bishop takes h1. Knight will come in. When I take the rook, it's double check. So black can't actually take the knight. Now it's time to try and finish things off efficiently. Get the queen in. Queen h5 will be checkmate. Okay, pretty nice game. Things definitely got sour for black pretty quickly in the opening. I mean, I do have to give my opponent credit for like really trying to survive. I mean, they kind of turned into a, what do we call it? Hedgehog or roly-poly type creature and just trying rolled up in a ball. And sometimes that's the best strategy, but I just had too many attacking ideas, especially once my knight got to f6. So black probably should have played d5 in this position, at least to prevent knight e4, and then black maybe could have played c5 and tried to exert pressure in the center, and at least it's a bit more difficult for white to attack. Of course, earlier, if black's playing this opening and runs into this line again, then the best approach is to take, and because the d-file is now open, the queen would support the knight coming to d5. And this is just a lot more pleasant because the knight's in the center rather than on the side. And then there's ideas of bishop g4 and c6 or knight c6, and life would go on from here. So I think a nice kind of collection of games for today's episode. A lot of the games featured kind of just full domination, but hopefully a lot of lessons to take away. So as usual, if you like the content, do subscribe. It does help the channel grow. If you have questions, leave them below. I look forward to reading the comments. And stay tuned for the next episode. See you guys soon.